The security alarm shrieked through the Goddard Space Flight Center like a banshee at 3:47 a.m., shattering the Maryland night. Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the reinforced glass of the main entrance, her breath fogging the surface as red emergency lights bathed everything in an apocalyptic glow. Inside, she could see them. Dozens of NASA's top scientists running through corridors with tablets and printouts, their faces etched with the kind of terror reserved for extinction-level events. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She knew exactly why they were panicking. 3 hours ago, every major observatory on Earth had detected the same thing. A massive asteroid field, previously hidden behind Jupiter's gravitational shadow, had shifted trajectory. The rocks were heading straight for Earth, and impact was calculated at 18 months. But Elena wasn't here because of the asteroids. She was here because, buried in her rejected research files, lay the solution they desperately needed. The woman standing outside NASA's most secure facility looked like someone who might teach night classes at a community college, which, in fact, she did. At 42, Elena had the kind of unremarkable appearance that made people's eyes slide past her in grocery stores. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, streaked with premature gray that she'd never bothered to cover. She wore a faded denim jacket over a simple white t-shirt, jeans with honest wear marks, and sneakers that had walked countless miles across campus parking lots. The only hint of her true expertise was the small telescope pendant hanging from a silver chain around her neck, a gift from her late father when she'd earned her doctorate 15 years ago. Elena's beat-up Honda Civic sat in the visitor parking lot, its engine still ticking as it cooled. The drive from her cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains had taken 4 hours, but she'd made it in 3, pushing the old car to its limits through winding mountain roads and empty highways. She'd listened to emergency broadcasts the entire way, each update more dire than the last. World leaders were being awakened. Military installations were going to full alert. The media was already speculating about deep space missions and nuclear options. They had no idea that the answer they needed had been sitting in their rejection files for over a decade. Agent Patricia Kane emerged from the building's main entrance, her black tactical uniform making her look like she'd stepped out of a shadow. 3 security officers flanked her, their hands resting casually on their sidearms. Kane was the kind of woman who'd built her career on reading threats and eliminating them efficiently. Her steel-gray hair was cut in a military bob, and her eyes held the flat, assessing quality of someone who'd spent decades assuming the worst about people. "Ma'am, this is a restricted facility," Kane announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. "Especially during a national emergency. I'm going to need you to step away from the building and return to your vehicle." Elena didn't move. Instead, she reached slowly into her jacket pocket, causing all 4 security officers to tense. What she withdrew wasn't a weapon. It was a worn manila folder, thick with papers and held together by a rubber band that had seen better days. "Agent Kane," Elena said quietly, reading the woman's name tag. "I need to speak with Director Webb. It's about the asteroids." Kane's expression shifted to something between annoyance and pity. Since the emergency had been announced 3 hours ago, every conspiracy theorist, doomsday prepper, and self-proclaimed genius on the East Coast had been trying to get into Goddard. The phone lines were jammed with people claiming they had solutions involving everything from prayer circles to homemade rockets. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but unless you're on the cleared personnel list, I cannot." "The gravitational wave signatures," Elena interrupted, her voice still calm but carrying an undercurrent of urgency. "The ones your deep space monitoring stations picked up 6 months ago and dismissed as equipment malfunction. They weren't malfunctions. They were early warning signals that I've been tracking for 3 years." Kane paused. The gravitational wave anomalies were classified information, known only to a handful of NASA's senior staff. How could a random civilian know about them? "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification." Elena pulled out her driver's license, and Kane examined it under her flashlight. "Elena Vasquez, Fredericksburg, Virginia. What's your connection to NASA, Ms. Vasquez?" "Dr. Vasquez," Elena corrected gently. "And my connection is 12 rejection letters, each one explaining why my research into gravitational wave prediction models wasn't worth NASA's time or funding. Lieutenant Kevin Park, one of the younger security officers, stepped forward. He was the kind of eager recruit who still believed that following protocol to the letter would advance his career. Ma'am, with all due respect, half the physics professors in the country probably have rejection letters from NASA. That doesn't mean... Kepler 442c, Elena said simply. The name hit Kane like a physical blow. Her hand instinctively moved to the radio clipped to her tactical vest, but she stopped herself. Kepler 442c was the designation for a planet that officially didn't exist, at least not in any public records. 3 years ago, an unauthorized signal had been detected from that sector, suggesting the presence of a previously unknown celestial body. The discovery had been immediately classified because the implications were too sensitive for public release. How do you know that designation? Kane's voice had dropped to a whisper. Elena held up the manila folder. Because I'm the one who discovered it. And more importantly, I'm the one who figured out why it matters. Inside the building, the emergency lights continued their relentless rotation. Through the glass, Elena could see Director Harrison Webb himself striding through the main corridor, still in his pajamas, under a hastily thrown-on lab coat. Webb was a man who'd built his reputation on making quick decisions under pressure, but the expression on his face suggested he was encountering something beyond his experience. Dr. Marcus Caldwell appeared beside Webb, clutching a tablet and speaking rapidly. Caldwell was NASA's golden boy, Harvard-educated, with a resume that read like a greatest hits of space exploration. At 38, he was the youngest department head in NASA's history, and he'd earned that position by being absolutely certain about everything, especially when it came to dismissing ideas that didn't align with established protocols. Kane spoke into her radio, her eyes never leaving Elena. Control. I need an immediate background check on Dr. Elena Vasquez, Virginia driver's license number. She rattled off the numbers, then waited. The response crackled back within minutes. Agent Kane, subject has a Ph.D. in astrophysics from University of Colorado Boulder, graduated summa cum laude 15 years ago, currently employed as adjunct professor at Fredericksburg Community College. Multiple patent applications filed with the U.S. Patent Office related to gravitational wave detection equipment. And Kane... The voice paused. She's filed 12 formal research proposals with NASA over the past decade. All rejected. Kane looked at Elena with new interest. Dr. Vasquez, what exactly are you proposing? Elena glanced at the building where NASA's brightest minds were undoubtedly running computer models, calculating trajectories, and exploring every conventional option for dealing with 18 months' worth of incoming cosmic debris. I'm proposing that they stop looking at this as a problem to solve with rockets and nuclear warheads and start understanding it for what it really is, a consequence of gravitational forces they've been ignoring for years. And you think you can help them understand these forces? Elena's smile was sad and knowing. Agent Kane, I've been trying to help them understand for 15 years. The question isn't whether I can help. It's whether they're finally desperate enough to listen. Dr. Benjamin Torres, a young astronomer who'd been working the night shift, approached the main entrance from inside. Torres was one of the new generation of NASA scientists. Brilliant, ambitious, but still idealistic enough to believe that good ideas could come from anywhere. He'd been monitoring the conversation through the security cameras, and something about the woman outside had caught his attention. He swiped his badge and stepped outside, much to Kane's immediate irritation. Dr. Torres, you need to return to your station, Kane ordered. Torres ignored her, focusing instead on Elena. Dr. Vasquez, I know that name. You're the one who submitted the paper on gravitational wave cascade effects. I read it when I was in graduate school. Elena's eyebrows rose slightly. You read a rejected NASA proposal? My professor used it as an example of innovative thinking that was ahead of its time. He said your mathematical models were elegant, but that you lacked the institutional support to prove them. Torres paused, studying Elena's face. You predicted gravitational disturbances in the outer system 3 years before we detected them. Kane was growing impatient. The national emergency was escalating by the minute, and she had what appeared to be a legitimate scientist making claims about classified information while standing outside the most secure space facility on the East Coast. Her training told her to remove the potential threat, but her instincts suggested that this unremarkable woman might actually possess information they needed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dr. Vasquez, Kane said finally. If you have relevant information about the current crisis, I can arrange for you to speak with someone inside. But I need you to understand that if you're wasting our time during a national emergency— I'm not wasting anyone's time, Elena replied. But I need to speak with Director Webb directly. What I have to share isn't something that can be filtered through middle management. Park laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the night air. Ma'am, Director Webb is coordinating with the Pentagon, the White House, and every major space agency on Earth. He doesn't have time to meet with every civilian who thinks they have a solution. Elena looked at the young officer with the patience of someone who'd spent years dealing with skepticism. Lieutenant Park, in about 20 minutes, Director Webb is going to realize that every conventional approach to stopping those asteroids is either impossible with current technology or would require resources we don't have. He's going to start looking for unconventional solutions. She held up the manila folder again. This contains unconventional solutions that I've been developing for over a decade, specifically for scenarios like this one. The question is whether NASA wants to wait until they've exhausted every conventional option before they consider it, or whether they want to get ahead of the crisis. Quote, Torres stepped closer, his excitement evident. Dr. Vasquez, your cascade effect theory. If you're right about gravitational waves preceding major celestial events, then the asteroids might not be a random occurrence. They could be responding to gravitational influences we haven't identified yet. Exactly, Elena said, and for the first time that night she looked genuinely hopeful. Someone finally understands. Kane made a decision that would change everything. She keyed her radio again. Control, I need you to patch me through to Director Webb directly. Tell him Agent Kane has a drive, Elena Vasquez, at the main entrance, and that she claims to have relevant information about the gravitational wave anomalies detected 6 months ago. The response was immediate. Kane, Director Webb says to bring her to Conference Room Alpha immediately. And Kane, he says to treat this as Code 7 priority. Code 7 was reserved for information that could affect national security. Kane looked at Elena with new respect and a growing sense that this unremarkable woman in her faded denim jacket might be exactly what NASA needed. As they walked toward the building's entrance, Elena clutched her manila folder a little tighter. Inside those worn pages were 15 years of research, 12 rejections, and what might be humanity's only hope of surviving the next 18 months. But more than that, they contain proof that sometimes the most important discoveries come from the people who've been dismissed, overlooked, and told they don't belong. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss, and Elena stepped into the building where she'd once dreamed of working. The emergency lights painted everything in shades of urgency, and the corridors buzzed with a kind of controlled chaos that only occurred when humanity's survival hung in the balance. As they walked deeper into the facility, Elena could hear fragments of conversations from various departments. Computer models were failing. Launch windows were impossible. Nuclear options were being discussed and dismissed. The greatest scientific minds in the country were running out of ideas, and time was running out for everyone. But Elena wasn't worried about time. She'd been preparing for this moment for 15 years, through every rejection, every dismissal, every night spent alone in her mountain observatory, tracking gravitational waves that no one else believed mattered. Tonight, finally, someone was going to listen. The woman who'd been rejected 12 times was about to show NASA how to save the world. Conference Room Alpha buzzed with the kind of tension that only emerged when brilliant minds encountered problems beyond their expertise. Director Harrison Webb sat at the head of a polished oak table, surrounded by NASA's elite scientific team. At 56, Webb had weathered every crisis, from shuttle disasters to budget cuts, but the deep lines around his eyes suggested this night had aged him years in just hours. Dr. Marcus Caldwell dominated the conversation, his voice carrying the confident authority of someone who'd never been fundamentally wrong about anything important. He gestured toward the massive wall display showing the asteroid field's trajectory, each red dot representing a chunk of space debris large enough to level a major city. "The calculations are absolutely clear," Caldwell declared, his Harvard-trained certainty filling the room. "We have 18 months to deploy a series of nuclear interceptors, The orbital mechanics are complex, but fundamentally straightforward. We identify the largest asteroids, match their trajectories, and eliminate them before they enter Earth's gravitational well. Dr. Sarah Hoffman, NASA's chief mathematician, looked exhausted as she scrolled through data on her tablet. Marcus, the energy requirements alone would exceed our entire nuclear arsenal. We're talking about rocks the size of city blocks moving at velocities that would make our warheads look like firecrackers. Then we build bigger warheads, Caldwell replied dismissively. The Pentagon has resources we haven't even considered. This is about survival, not budget constraints. Webb rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of command pressing down on him like a physical force. Through the room's floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see the pre-dawn sky beginning to lighten, though the emergency lights still cast their red glow throughout the facility. Somewhere out there, beyond the atmosphere, a cosmic catastrophe was bearing down on Earth, and humanity's best minds were arguing about nuclear weapons like children fighting over toys. What about deflection rather than destruction? Asked Dr. Jennifer Park, the facility's youngest department head. If we could alter their trajectories slightly, we might be able to redirect them away from Earth entirely. Caldwell shook his head with the patience of a professor correcting a particularly slow student. Jennifer, you're talking about objects with mass measured in billions of tons. The amount of force required to meaningfully alter their course would be equivalent to moving mountains. We don't have technology capable of generating that kind of directed energy. The debate continued, each scientist offering variations on the same impossible theme: launch more rockets, build bigger weapons, somehow overcome the fundamental laws of physics through sheer determination and unlimited funding. Webb had heard similar conversations throughout his career, but never with stakes this absolute. That's when Agent Kane's voice crackled through the intercom. Director Webb, I have Dr. Elena Vasquez here with information relevant to the gravitational wave anomalies. The room fell silent. Every person at that table knew about the anomalies. Mysterious readings detected 6 months ago by NASA's Deep Space Monitoring Network. The signals had been dismissed as equipment malfunctions because they didn't match any known celestial phenomena. Now, with asteroids heading toward Earth from the same general sector of space, those anomalies suddenly seemed less like malfunctions and more like warnings. Send her in, Webb ordered, his voice carrying a weariness that spoke of too many sleepless nights and impossible decisions. When Elena walked through the conference room doors, the contrast was striking. Here were some of the most accomplished scientists in the world, all dressed in official NASA attire or hastily thrown on professional clothes, sitting around a table that probably cost more than Elena's annual salary. And there was Elena herself, looking like someone who'd driven through the night in a beat-up Honda Civic, carrying a manila folder held together with a rubber band. Dr. Caldwell's reaction was immediate and predictable. He glanced at Elena's casual attire, noted her unremarkable appearance, and his expression shifted to barely concealed irritation. Webb, we're in the middle of a crisis that requires our absolute focus. I'm not sure this is the time for public consultation. Elena took a seat at the far end of the table without being invited, placing her manila folder carefully in front of her. She looked around at the assembled scientists with the calm assessment of someone who'd spent years being underestimated and had long since stopped caring about first impressions. Dr. Caldwell, she said, her voice quiet but carrying clearly through the room. 6 months ago, your deep space array detected gravitational wave patterns originating from coordinates 847 to 23 alpha. Your team classified them as equipment malfunction because they didn't match established models for stellar collapse, neutron star mergers, or black hole interactions. Caldwell's irritation sharpened. How do you know about classified monitoring data? Elena opened her folder and withdrew a thick stack of papers covered in complex mathematical equations. Because I've been tracking similar patterns for 3 years, using equipment I built in my home observatory. And unlike your team, I didn't dismiss them as malfunction. I recognize them for what they are: gravitational echoes from a planetary body that shouldn't exist according to current astronomical models. Dr. Hoffman looked up from her tablet, sudden interest replacing exhaustion. You're talking about Kepler 442c. The designation your team assigned to a planet you can't officially acknowledge exists, Elena confirmed. Yes. Webb leaned forward, his full attention now focused on this unremarkable woman who seemed to know things that should have been impossible for a civilian to know. Dr. Vasquez, how exactly did you come by this information? Elena's smile held no warmth, only the bitter satisfaction of someone who'd been proven right after years of being dismissed. Director Webb, 12 times over the past decade, I've submitted research proposals to NASA. 12 times, your review boards have rejected my work as theoretically interesting but practically irrelevant. The last rejection letter, which I received 8 months ago, specifically criticized my, quote, obsession with gravitational wave cascade effects in planetary formation scenarios. She pulled out a worn piece of NASA letterhead and placed it on the table. Dr. Caldwell himself signed that rejection letter. He wrote that my theories about hidden planetary bodies influencing asteroid trajectories were more suited to science fiction than serious scientific inquiry. The room fell silent except for the hum of computers and the distant sound of emergency alarms from other parts of the facility. Caldwell's face had gone pale as he recognized his own signature on the letter. But here's what none of you understood, Elena continued, her voice growing stronger. Kepler 442c isn't just a hidden planet. It's a gravitational anchor that's been preventing the asteroid field currently heading toward Earth from entering our solar system for thousands of years. 3 years ago, something happened to that planet. A massive geological shift that altered its gravitational field. The wave patterns I've been tracking are the planet's death throes. Dr. Park found her voice first. You're saying the asteroids aren't random space debris. They're being released because a planetary body can no longer hold them in gravitational equilibrium. Exactly, Elena replied. And every model you're currently running is based on the assumption that we're dealing with a natural asteroid impact scenario. You're trying to solve the wrong problem. Caldwell stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. This is insane. You're talking about invisible planets and gravitational anchors like something out of a fantasy novel. We need real solutions, not elaborate theories from someone who teaches basic astronomy at a community college. The dismissal hit Elena with familiar force, but this time she didn't absorb it quietly. She'd spent 15 years being told her work wasn't good enough, wasn't practical enough, wasn't mainstream enough. Tonight, with humanity's survival potentially hanging in the balance, she was done accepting that judgment. Dr. Caldwell, she said, standing to match his posture, what's your current success rate for stopping asteroid impacts using nuclear interceptors? We've never had to implement such a program, but the theoretical models are based on single asteroids or small clusters, not coordinated swarms held in formation by gravitational forces you don't understand. Elena opened her folder and spread dozens of calculations across the table. Your nuclear option won't work because you're not accounting for the gravitational relationships between the asteroids themselves. Destroy the leading rocks, and the trailing debris will simply reorganize into new impact vectors. Dr. Hoffman was studying Elena's equations, her eyes widening as she followed the mathematical logic. These cascade calculations, they're incredibly sophisticated. If you're right about the gravitational interdependencies, then conventional deflection methods would be worse than useless. They'd actually increase the total impact area. Which is why, Elena said, we need to restore the gravitational anchor that's been holding this asteroid field in check for millennia. Webb looked at her with the expression of a man who'd just been offered either salvation or elaborate delusion. And how exactly do you propose we restore gravitational equilibrium to a planet we can't even officially acknowledge exists? Elena reached into her folder one more time and withdrew a device that looked like something between a smartphone and a scientific calculator. Its screen showed a complex three-dimensional model of gravitational fields, with waves and patterns flowing in real time. This is a gravitational wave generator I've been developing for the past 5 years. It's based on theoretical work that NASA has rejected 3 separate times as, quote, impractical and overly ambitious. The device can create localized gravitational disturbances that, when properly synchronized, can influence the gravitational fields of celestial bodies. The room erupted in skeptical murmurs. Caldwell laughed outright, a harsh sound that echoed off the conference room walls. You're telling us that you've single-handedly developed technology that would revolutionize physics, and you built it in your backyard observatory? That's not science, Dr. Vasquez. That's delusion. Elena pressed a button on her device, and suddenly every piece of electronic equipment in the room flickered. Tablets reset themselves, the wall display wavered, and the lights dimmed for 3 seconds. When everything returned to normal, The room was dead silent. The gravitational waves generated by this device just interfered with the electromagnetic fields of every computer in this room. Elena explained calmly. If I can create interference patterns strong enough to affect electronics from 30 feet away, what do you think would happen if I scaled up the technology and aimed it at a dying planet? Dr. Torres, who had been quietly observing from his position near the door, stepped forward. Dr. Vasquez, you're talking about gravitational engineering on a planetary scale. Even if the technology worked, the energy requirements would be enormous. Which is why, Elena replied, I need NASA's Deep Space Communication Network and your orbital energy collection systems. The gravitational wave generator is just the focusing mechanism. The real power would come from redirecting solar energy through synchronized satellite arrays. Webb felt the familiar sensation of being presented with something that sounded simultaneously impossible and inevitable. Throughout his career, he'd learned to recognize the difference between genuine breakthrough thinking and elaborate wishful thinking. Something about Elena's calm confidence and the mathematical precision of her work suggested she might have crossed the line from theory into practical application. Dr. Vasquez, he said carefully, assuming for a moment that your analysis is correct, how long would it take to implement your proposed solution? Elena consulted her device, running calculations in real time. If we begin immediately, and if NASA provides full access to its deep space resources, we could have the gravitational anchor restored within 16 months. That gives us a 2-month margin, Dr. Hoffman observed. If everything goes perfectly, Caldwell interjected. And if we're willing to bet humanity's survival on technology that's never been tested, and theories that contradict established physics. Elena looked directly at Caldwell, and for the first time that night, her expression held something approaching pity. Dr. Caldwell, your established physics didn't predict the asteroid field. Your established models can't stop it. Your established solutions don't work. She gestured toward her scattered calculations. Sometimes the only way forward is to abandon what you think you know and trust what the evidence actually tells you. The conference room fell silent again, but this time the silence held weight. Every person in that room understood that they had reached a moment of absolute decision. They could continue pursuing conventional solutions that every calculation suggested would fail, or they could trust their survival to a woman who'd been dismissed by their institution for over a decade. Webb looked around the table, reading the faces of his top scientists. Dr. Hoffman was studying Elena's equations with growing fascination. Dr. Park was running Elena's theoretical models through her tablet, nodding slowly as the mathematics proved consistent. Even Dr. Torres, despite his youth, seemed to be grasping implications that the senior staff was still struggling to accept. Only Caldwell remained adamantly opposed, his prestigious education and institutional authority making it impossible for him to acknowledge that a community college professor might have solved problems that had stumped NASA's finest minds. Director Webb, Caldwell said, his voice tight with controlled frustration, I strongly advise against pursuing this course of action. We're talking about abandoning proven scientific methods in favor of untested theories from someone with no institutional credentials. Elena gathered her papers with deliberate care, her movements suggesting someone who'd heard similar objections countless times. Dr. Caldwell, what institutional credentials would you consider adequate? A PhD in astrophysics from the University of Colorado? 5 patents in gravitational wave technology? 15 years of published research in peer-reviewed journals? She paused, looking directly at him. Or maybe 12 NASA rejection letters that prove I've been trying to share this information with your institution for over a decade? The weight of that statement settled over the room like a physical presence. Here was a woman who possessed exactly the credentials Caldwell claimed she lacked, who had been attempting to work within NASA's system for years, only to be repeatedly dismissed by the same institutional thinking that was now proving inadequate to address humanity's greatest crisis. Webb made his decision with the certainty of someone who'd spent a career learning to trust his instincts over conventional wisdom. Dr. Vasquez, I'm authorizing full access to NASA's Deep Space Communication Network and orbital energy systems. Whatever resources you need, consider them yours. Caldwell stood abruptly, his face flushed with indignation. Webb, you're making a catastrophic mistake. You're gambling with human civilization, based on the claims of someone who couldn't even get hired by NASA. Elena's response was quiet, but devastating. Dr. Caldwell, NASA never offered me a position because people like you convinced people like Director Webb that my work wasn't worth their attention. But my work was never the problem. The problem was that accepting my research would have required acknowledging that your institutional expertise had missed something fundamental about how the universe actually operates. She closed her manila folder and tucked it under her arm. I spent 15 years trying to work within your system. Tonight, finally, your system is going to work with me. As Elena walked toward the door to begin the work that might save humanity, she carried with her not just revolutionary technology and groundbreaking theories, but the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd been proven right after years of being dismissed as irrelevant. The woman who'd been rejected 12 times was about to become the person who saved the world. The next 18 hours transformed Elena from rejected outsider to the most important person at Goddard Space Flight Center. Director Webb had assigned her a full laboratory team, complete access to NASA's computational resources, and a direct communication link that bypassed every bureaucratic layer between her and the agency's most sensitive operations. Yet as she stood in Laboratory 7, surrounded by equipment worth more than most countries' annual budgets, Elena felt the familiar weight of institutional skepticism pressing down on her like a physical force. Dr. Caldwell hadn't accepted Webb's decision gracefully. Since the conference room meeting, he'd been conducting what amounted to a shadow campaign against Elena's project, questioning her methodology in hushed conversations with senior staff, and filing formal objections that created administrative roadblocks at every turn. Elena could feel his presence throughout the facility like a persistent headache, always just out of sight but never completely absent. The laboratory itself was a testament to NASA's technological capabilities. Massive servers hummed along one wall, their processing power dedicated entirely to Elena's gravitational calculations. Holographic displays showed real-time data from deep space monitoring stations, with Elena's gravitational wave patterns overlaid onto conventional astronomical readings. The contrast was striking. Where NASA's traditional instruments showed empty space dotted with distant stars, Elena's modifications revealed a complex web of gravitational influences flowing between celestial bodies like invisible rivers. Dr. Benjamin Torres had become Elena's primary liaison, his youthful enthusiasm serving as a bridge between her unconventional approach and NASA's institutional requirements. Torres possessed the rare combination of technical expertise and intellectual humility that allowed him to grasp Elena's theories without feeling threatened by their implications for established science. Dr. Vasquez, Torres said, approaching her workstation with a tablet full of preliminary calculations. I've been running your gravitational cascade models through NASA's deep space simulation systems. The results are remarkable, but I'm having difficulty understanding how you develop such sophisticated equations working alone. Elena looked up from the gravitational wave generator she'd been modifying, her hands stained with the kind of technical work that reminded her of countless nights in her mountain observatory. Dr. Torres, isolation can be a powerful catalyst for innovation. When you're not constantly defending your ideas against institutional skepticism, you can focus entirely on following the evidence wherever it leads. She gestured toward the holographic displays, where her gravitational wave patterns painted space in flowing colors that revealed hidden connections between distant objects. NASA's approach to astronomy has always been observational, looking at individual stars, planets, and phenomena as discrete objects. But gravitational forces don't respect those boundaries. They create relationships and influences that extend across vast distances. Torres studied the displays with growing fascination. You're saying that traditional astronomy has been missing the forest for the trees. Exactly. When you start tracking gravitational waves as continuous phenomena rather than isolated events, patterns emerge that completely change our understanding of how celestial mechanics actually operate. Elena pulled up a specific section of data showing the asteroid field's trajectory. This asteroid swarm isn't random debris from some ancient collision. It's been held in gravitational equilibrium by Kepler 442c for thousands of years, prevented from entering our solar system by forces we never thought to measure. Dr. Sarah Hoffman appeared in the laboratory doorway, her expression combining exhaustion with reluctant admiration. As NASA's chief mathematician, Hoffman had spent the past 18 hours attempting to find flaws in Elena's theoretical framework. The results had been both frustrating and enlightening. Elena's mathematics were not only correct, but represented advances in gravitational theory that would have taken conventional research teams decades to develop. "Dr. Vasquez," Hoffman said, approaching with the careful respect of someone who'd learned not to underestimate their subject. "I've completed my analysis of your gravitational anchor restoration equations. The mathematics are sound, but the energy requirements are still staggering. Even with full access to NASA's orbital solar collection systems, we're talking about power consumption that exceeds anything humanity has ever attempted." Elena nodded, having anticipated this concern. "Dr. Hoffman, you're calculating energy requirements based on the assumption that we need to generate gravitational forces from nothing. But that's not what we're doing. Kepler 442c still exists, it's just lost gravitational coherence due to internal geological collapse. We're not creating new gravitational fields, we're helping the planet restore its natural gravitational signature." She manipulated the holographic display to show Kepler 442c's current state, a dying world whose core instability had disrupted the gravitational waves that once held the asteroid field in check. Think of it like restarting a stopped heart, rather than building a new cardiovascular system. The planet's mass is still there, its orbital mechanics are still intact. We just need to provide the gravitational pulse that allows its natural systems to resume function. Hoffman studied the display with growing understanding. "You're talking about gravitational defibrillation on a planetary scale." "Precisely. And, just like medical defibrillation, success depends more on precise timing and proper technique than on raw power." Elena brought up another series of calculations showing synchronized gravitational pulses transmitted through NASA's Deep Space Communication Network. The energy requirements are still enormous by human standards, but manageable using existing technology. Torres had been quietly running Elena's equations through his own analysis software, and his expression showed growing excitement. "Dr. Vasquez, if your approach works, the implications extend far beyond solving our immediate asteroid crisis. We're talking about the ability to influence planetary-scale phenomena from across interstellar distances." Elena's smile held both satisfaction and warning. "Dr. Torres, that's exactly why NASA rejected my research proposals for 15 years. The implications are so significant that accepting them would require fundamental changes to how we approach space exploration and planetary science." That's when Dr. Caldwell's voice echoed through the laboratory's intercom system, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having his concerns taken seriously. "Dr. Vasquez, this is Dr. Caldwell. I need you to report to Conference Room Alpha immediately. We have representatives from the Pentagon and the International Space Consortium who need to evaluate your proposed solution." Elena exchanged glances with Torres and Hoffman, both of whom understood that Caldwell's request was actually a carefully orchestrated challenge. By bringing in outside authorities, Caldwell was attempting to subject Elena's work to the kind of institutional scrutiny that had dismissed her research in the past. "Dr. Caldwell," Elena replied through the intercom, her voice carrying calm confidence. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Please ensure that the conference room's holographic display system is configured for advanced gravitational modeling." "That won't be necessary," Caldwell's voice crackled back. "These officials need clear, straightforward explanations, not elaborate visual presentations." Elena's smile held the sharp edge of someone who'd learned to recognize deliberate sabotage. "Dr. Caldwell, gravitational wave theory cannot be adequately explained without visual modeling. Either provide proper display capabilities, or accept responsibility for presenting incomplete information to officials making decisions about humanity's survival." The intercom fell silent, and Elena knew that Caldwell was struggling with the impossible position she'd placed him in. He could either accommodate her technical requirements, or explain to Pentagon officials why he'd prevented them from seeing critical data. 15 minutes later, Elena walked into Conference Room Alpha to find it filled with people whose presence indicated just how seriously the government was taking the asteroid crisis. General Catherine Ross represented the Pentagon's Deep Space Defense Initiative, her uniform decorated with ribbons that spoke of classified operations in humanity's most sensitive military programs. Dr. Marcus Webb, Director Harrison Webb's brother and head of the International Space Consortium, had flown in from Geneva specifically for this briefing. Agent Patricia Kane sat at the table's far end, her role apparently expanded from facility security to intelligence liaison. Dr. Caldwell occupied his usual position at the table's head, surrounded by printed reports and tablets displaying conventional asteroid impact models. His expression suggested someone who'd spent considerable time preparing arguments against Elena's approach, confident that outside scrutiny would reveal the flaws he was certain existed in her work. Dr. Vasquez, General Ross began without preamble, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions based on incomplete information. Dr. Caldwell has briefed us on your proposed solution to the asteroid crisis. I'll be direct. What you're describing sounds like science fiction rather than operational planning. Elena had expected this reaction. Military officials were trained to prefer solutions that involved applications of known technology and established tactics. The idea that humanity's survival might depend on theoretical physics and untested equipment violated every principle of military planning. General Ross, Elena replied, settling into the chair across from the general. 6 months ago, NASA's deep space monitoring systems detected gravitational wave anomalies that your conventional science classified as equipment malfunction. 3 weeks ago, those same instruments identified an asteroid field heading directly toward Earth. The connection between these events isn't science fiction. It's cause and effect that your established models failed to predict. She activated the room's holographic display system, which Caldwell had apparently been forced to configure despite his objections. Immediately, the conference room filled with a three-dimensional representation of local space, showing gravitational wave patterns flowing between celestial bodies like luminous currents. Dr. Marcus Webb leaned forward, his expression shifting from skepticism to intense interest. As head of the International Space Consortium, he'd seen promising theories come and go, but something about Elena's visual presentation suggested a level of sophisticated understanding that transcended typical academic speculation. Dr. Vasquez, he said, this gravitational mapping is extraordinarily detailed. How did you develop such precise measurements of interstellar gravitational influences? Elena manipulated the display to focus on Kepler 442c and its relationship to the approaching asteroid field. Dr. Webb, I've been tracking these gravitational patterns for 3 years using equipment I designed specifically for long-term gravitational wave monitoring. Unlike NASA's deep space instruments, which are optimized for detecting dramatic gravitational events like neutron star collisions, my equipment focuses on subtle, continuous gravitational influences that affect planetary mechanics over extended periods. General Ross studied the display with the analytical intensity of someone evaluating tactical information. Dr. Vasquez, assuming your analysis is correct, what's your confidence level that this gravitational anchor restoration will actually work? Elena had been dreading this question because honest assessment required acknowledging uncertainties that military officials typically found unacceptable. General, I'm confident that the gravitational mathematics are correct, and that Kepler 442c's geological instability is directly responsible for releasing the asteroid field. I'm confident that properly synchronized gravitational pulses can restore planetary gravitational coherence. She paused, meeting General Ross's gaze directly. What I cannot guarantee is that we'll execute the synchronization perfectly on our first attempt, or that unforeseen variables won't require real-time adjustments to our approach. Agent Kane spoke for the first time during the meeting, her security background making her focus on practical implementation rather than theoretical validity. Dr. Vasquez, Dr. Caldwell has raised concerns about your lack of institutional credentials and the untested nature of your technology. How do we verify that your equipment will function as designed under operational conditions? Elena reached into her ever-present manila folder and withdrew a device similar to the gravitational wave generator she'd demonstrated previously, but clearly modified for enhanced capabilities. Agent Kane, verification requires testing under controlled conditions. With Director Webb's authorization, I've been conducting small-scale gravitational wave generation experiments using NASA's laboratory facilities. She placed the device on the conference table and activated its display screen, which showed real-time gravitational field measurements throughout the room. This device is currently mapping the gravitational influences of every person and object in this conference room. It can detect gravitational variations as small as those created by someone moving their hand. Dr. Caldwell's skepticism finally boiled over into open confrontation. Dr. Vasquez, parlor tricks with sensitive instruments don't constitute proof that your technology can influence planetary-scale phenomena across interstellar distances. Elena's response was calm, but devastating. Dr. Caldwell, 3 hours ago you filed a formal objection to my project, claiming that gravitational wave generation was, quote, theoretically impossible using current technology. Would you like me to demonstrate just how wrong that assessment was? She pressed a series of buttons on her device, and suddenly, every electronic device in the conference room began displaying identical gravitational wave patterns. Tablets, laptops, and wall displays all showed the same flowing, pulsing data streams, synchronized with mathematical precision that would have been impossible to fake. The gravitational waves generated by this device are currently interfacing with the electromagnetic fields of every computer in this room, Elena explained to the stunned silence. If I can create synchronized gravitational effects across 30 feet of conference room space, scaling up to interstellar distances becomes a matter of amplification rather than fundamental breakthrough. General Ross leaned back in her chair, her expression showing the kind of reassessment that occurred when established assumptions proved inadequate. Dr. Vasquez, what timeline are we looking at for full implementation? 15 months for complete gravitational anchor restoration, assuming immediate access to NASA's Deep Space Communication Network and orbital energy systems. Elena manipulated her device to show projected timelines and resource requirements. The critical factor isn't technology development. It's coordination between multiple satellite systems and precise timing of gravitational pulse sequences. Dr. Marcus Webb had been quietly studying Elena's holographic displays, and his expression suggested someone who'd recognized implications beyond the immediate crisis. Dr. Vasquez, successful implementation of your approach would represent a fundamental advancement in humanity's ability to influence cosmic-scale phenomena. Are you prepared for the geopolitical consequences of possessing such technology? Elena's smile held the weariness of someone who'd spent years thinking about questions that others were only beginning to consider. Dr. Webb, I've been preparing for those consequences every day for the past 3 years. The technology exists. The mathematical framework is proven. The only question is whether humanity will use these capabilities responsibly or allow them to become another source of international conflict. Agent Kane's security training made her focus on the immediate threat rather than long-term implications. Dr. Vasquez, what happens if your gravitational anchor restoration fails? Do we have backup options? Elena's expression grew somber as she contemplated humanity's alternatives. Agent Kane, if gravitational anchor restoration fails, then conventional approaches become our only option. Dr. Caldwell's nuclear interception program, massive evacuation efforts, underground shelter construction, all of the responses that might save some portion of humanity while accepting that civilization as we know it would end. She gestured toward the holographic display showing the asteroid field's inexorable approach toward Earth. But those conventional approaches are treating symptoms rather than causes. Even if we successfully destroy or deflect this particular asteroid swarm, the underlying gravitational instability that released them remains unaddressed. Without Kepler 442c functioning as a gravitational anchor, other debris fields could be released at any time. General Ross absorbed this information with the grim pragmatism of someone who'd spent a career planning for worst-case scenarios. Dr. Vasquez, I'm authorizing full military support for your gravitational anchor project. Whatever resources you need, personnel, equipment, funding, consider them available. Dr. Caldwell's face flushed with indignation at seeing his institutional authority superseded by external officials. General Ross, I must strongly protest this decision. We're gambling human civilization on untested theories from someone whose work has been consistently rejected by NASA's peer review process. Elena looked at Caldwell with something approaching pity, understanding that his opposition stemmed not from scientific skepticism, but from institutional pride, wounded by the revelation that his expertise had been inadequate to address humanity's greatest crisis. Dr. Caldwell, she said quietly, NASA's peer review process rejected my work, because accepting it would have required acknowledging that your institutional approach to space science was missing fundamental aspects of how the universe operates. That wasn't a failure of my research. It was a limitation of your review criteria. She stood, gathering her materials with the deliberate care of someone who'd learned to protect her work against institutional dismissal. But tonight, institutional limitations don't matter. Physics doesn't care about peer review processes or academic credentials. The asteroid field is coming whether NASA's establishment approves of my methods or not. As Elena walked toward the door to begin the work that would either save humanity or prove her life's research catastrophically wrong, she carried with her not just the hopes of 7 billion people, but the quiet satisfaction of someone whose dismissed theories had finally found the recognition they deserved. The woman who'd been rejected 12 times was about to attempt something that would redefine humanity's relationship with the cosmos itself. The revelation came 3 days into Elena's integration with NASA's systems, when Dr. Benjamin Torres discovered something that would change everyone's understanding of who Elena Vasquez really was. Torres had been assigned to review Elena's personnel files as part of the security clearance process required for her access to classified deep space operations. What he found buried in archived records made him physically sick. Torres found Elena in Laboratory 7 at 2 in the morning, surrounded by holographic displays showing gravitational wave patterns from across the galaxy. She'd been working 18-hour days since gaining access to NASA's resources, driven by the knowledge that 15 months might not be enough time to perfect technology that humanity had never attempted before. "Dr. Vasquez," Torres said, his voice carrying a weight that made Elena look up from her calculations. "I need to ask you about something I found in the archived personnel records." Elena's expression didn't change, but something in her posture suggested she'd been expecting this conversation for years. "What did you find, Dr. Torres?" Torres activated his tablet and pulled up a document that looked official despite its age. 15 years ago, you submitted a formal application for a research position at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Your qualifications were extraordinary. Doctorate from University of Colorado with highest honors, breakthrough research in gravitational wave theory, recommendations from Nobel Prize winners. You should have been hired immediately. Elena continued working, her hands steady as she manipulated gravitational field equations that could save humanity or doom it to extinction. "But I wasn't hired." "No, you weren't." And according to the archive notes, the decision came from Dr. Marcus Caldwell himself. He was serving on the hiring committee, and he wrote that your research was too speculative for practical application, and that hiring you would encourage unrealistic expectations about NASA's research priorities. Elena's hands paused for just a moment before resuming their work. "Dr. Torres, institutional decisions are rarely based on single individuals. NASA's hiring practices reflect systemic preferences for conventional approaches over innovative thinking." Torres wasn't satisfied with that diplomatic response. He pulled up additional records, his voice growing more agitated as he read. "Dr. Vasquez, it wasn't just the JPL position. Over the past 15 years, Dr. Caldwell has been involved in reviewing every single one of your research proposals, fellowship applications, and collaboration requests. Every rejection, every dismissal, every closed door." Elena finally stopped working and turned to face Torres directly. "Dr. Torres, what exactly are you asking me?" "I'm asking if you knew. Did you know that the same person who's been fighting your current project has been systematically blocking your career for 15 years? Elena's smile held no anger, only the profound sadness of someone who'd learned to accept institutional betrayal as a permanent feature of her professional life. "Dr. Torres," I suspected. When the same institutional voice keeps rejecting your work using the same arguments, patterns become apparent. But suspecting and knowing are different things. Torres scrolled through more records, his indignation growing with each entry. "Dr. Vasquez, there's more. Much more. In 2018, you applied for a NASA research grant to develop gravitational wave monitoring equipment. The review board initially approved your proposal. The mathematics were sound, the potential applications were significant, and the budget was reasonable." Elena's expression grew more guarded. "Initially approved." Dr. Caldwell intervened personally. He convinced the review board that your project would, quote, "duplicate existing research efforts," and that funding would be better allocated to established research teams with proven track records. Your grant was revoked 3 days before equipment purchases were scheduled to begin. Elena turned back to her work, but Torres could see tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there moments before. Dr. Torres, dwelling on past disappointments won't help us solve the current crisis. But Torres wasn't finished. He'd found something that explained not just Elena's professional struggles, but the personal sacrifice that had driven her to continue working, despite years of institutional rejection. Dr. Vasquez, there's something else. Something about your daughter. Elena's hands stopped moving entirely. For the first time since Torres had known her, Elena looked vulnerable, as if someone had mentioned a wound that had never properly healed. Dr. Torres, my daughter Emma died in a car accident 8 years ago. I don't see how that's relevant to our current work. Torres consulted his tablet, his voice growing gentler as he realized he was approaching something deeply personal. Dr. Vasquez, according to the records I found, Emma died 3 weeks after you received your 5th NASA rejection letter. The rejection letter that denied your request for emergency funding to complete gravitational wave research that might have predicted the astronomical event that's now threatening humanity. Elena closed her eyes, and Torres could see years of suppressed grief threatening to surface. Dr. Torres, please stop. Dr. Vasquez, the accident report shows that Emma was killed by a drunk driver while you were driving to a community college where you'd taken a part-time teaching position. You took that job because NASA's rejection had left you without research funding, and you needed income to support your daughter as a single mother. Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. Dr. Torres, what's your point? My point is that if NASA had funded your research, when they should have, you would have been working in a proper laboratory instead of driving to a community college at night. Emma might still be alive, and humanity might have had years of advance warning about the asteroid crisis instead of 18 months. Elena stood abruptly, her composure finally cracking under the weight of suppressed guilt and loss. Dr. Torres, you think I haven't thought about that every single day for 8 years? You think I don't know that my daughter died because I couldn't convince people like Dr. Caldwell that my work mattered? Torres immediately regretted pushing so hard, but the injustice of Elena's situation had overwhelmed his usual diplomatic restraint. Dr. Vasquez, I'm sorry. I just wanted you to know that I understand what this project really means to you. Claire's presentation concluded with a series of photographs taken over the previous 3 months, documenting the continuing relationship between herself and the bear family. The images showed peaceful encounters during her regular veterinary work in the area, with the mother bear often bringing her cubs to observe Claire's activities from a respectful distance. The bears had learned to recognize her vehicle, her daily routines, and even her seasonal work patterns. They maintained their wild independence, while also demonstrating a level of trust and recognition that challenged every traditional understanding of human-wildlife boundaries. The relationship was neither domestication nor conditioning, but something entirely new that existed in the space between species. Morrison's fate had been decided by federal courts that showed little mercy for contractors who had violated public trust for personal gain. His conviction on multiple charges of fraud, falsifying federal documents, and conducting illegal hunting operations resulted in a 10-year prison sentence and lifetime ban from any wildlife-related government work. The man who had built his reputation on protecting humans from dangerous animals would spend the next decade learning about the consequences of becoming a predator himself. But Claire's presentation focused not on Morrison's punishment, but on the redemption stories that had emerged from the aftermath of his deception. Several of the federal agents who had participated in the hunting operation had requested transfers to conservation and wildlife protection divisions, dedicating their careers to undoing the damage caused by poorly conceived management policies. Their transformation from hunters to protectors demonstrated the same capacity for growth and change that Claire had recognized in the bear family. Ranger Tom Sullivan had become one of the most vocal advocates for reform within the Forest Service. His experience participating in an operation based on fabricated evidence had led him to develop new protocols for verifying threat assessments and ensuring that multiple perspectives were considered before any major wildlife intervention. Sullivan's work was being adopted by park services across the country, creating a lasting legacy from the lessons learned at Pine Lake. He spent 15 years trying to prove that dismissing you was the right decision, and your success would mean acknowledging that he was fundamentally wrong about something that could have saved countless lives. Elena's smile held the wisdom of someone who'd learned to understand human nature through years of disappointment. Dr. Torres, I know. I've always known. But that doesn't change what needs to be done. As they walked through NASA's corridors toward the main control center, Elena carried with her not just the weight of humanity's survival, but the memory of a little girl who dreamed of exploring the stars. Every step was taken in honor of Emma's promise. Every calculation was performed with the precision that love demands of sacrifice. The main control center buzzed with activity that suggested either breakthrough or emergency. Dr. Sarah Hoffman stood before the primary display screen, her expression combining excitement with concern as she tracked new data streams from NASA's Deep Space Monitoring Network. "Dr. Vasquez," Hoffman called as Elena entered the room, "we're receiving gravitational wave patterns from Kepler 442c that are completely different from anything in your previous research. The planetary core seems to be destabilizing faster than your models predicted." Elena approached the display and immediately began analyzing the new data, her years of experience allowing her to recognize patterns that would have taken other scientists hours to decipher. What she saw made her heart race with a combination of fear and opportunity. "Dr. Hoffman, you're right that the destabilization is accelerating. But look at the wave patterns more carefully. The planetary core isn't just collapsing. It's oscillating. Kepler 442c is essentially sending out gravitational distress signals." Torres studied the display over Elena's shoulder, his training allowing him to follow her analysis. "Dr. Vasquez, if the planet is oscillating rather than simply dying, does that change our approach to gravitational anchor restoration?" Elena's fingers flew across her gravitational wave generator as she calculated new possibilities in real time. "Dr. Torres, it changes everything. Instead of trying to restart a dead gravitational field, we can synchronize with the planet's existing oscillations and amplify them back to stable levels." "Doctor?" Caldwell appeared in the control center, surrounded by several senior NASA officials who'd clearly been briefed on the new developments. His expression suggested someone who'd been hoping that changing circumstances would prove Elena's approach unworkable. "Dr. Vasquez," Caldwell announced with barely concealed satisfaction, "these new readings demonstrate exactly why your theoretical approach is inadequate for real-world application. You've been developing solutions based on incomplete data, and now that we have better information, your entire project needs to be reconsidered." Elena didn't look away from the display as she responded, her voice carrying the calm confidence of someone who'd spent years learning to work with incomplete information. "Dr. Caldwell, scientific theories are meant to evolve as new data becomes available. The fact that I can adapt my approach to incorporate new information demonstrates the robustness of the underlying mathematics, not its weakness." She manipulated the display to show how Kepler 442c's oscillating gravitational field could be stabilized using modified versions of her original calculations. "Dr. Caldwell, if I had been working within NASA's institutional framework for the past 15 years, I would have had access to real-time data from the beginning. Instead, I had to develop theoretical models based on limited observations from my personal equipment." The implication was clear to everyone in the control center. Elena's research had been conducted under artificially difficult conditions because NASA's institutional bias had denied her access to the resources she needed. Despite these limitations, she developed solutions that proved adaptable to new information. Director Webb studied the modified calculations with growing appreciation for Elena's intellectual flexibility. "Dr. Vasquez, what's our new timeline for gravitational anchor restoration, given these changed circumstances?" Elena consulted her gravitational wave generator, running complex calculations that would have required NASA's most powerful computers just days before. "Director Webb, Kepler 442c's oscillating state actually makes our task easier. Instead of needing 15 months to restart a dead gravitational field, we can achieve stabilization in 12 months by working with the planet's existing oscillations." General Ross, who had remained in contact with the project via secure communication link, spoke through the control center's intercom system. "Dr. Vasquez, does this development change our confidence level for successful implementation?" Elena paused, considering the question with the honesty that had characterized all her interactions with military officials. General Ross, higher confidence in timeline but increased complexity in execution. We'll need more precise coordination between satellite systems, and there's less margin for error in our gravitational pulse timing. Agent Kane, monitoring the conversation from her security station, asked the question that everyone was thinking but no one wanted to voice. "Dr. Vasquez, what happens if we miss the synchronization window? Do we get a second chance?" Elena's expression grew somber as she contemplated the implications of failure. Agent Kane, gravitational anchor restoration is essentially planetary-scale surgery. If we miss our synchronization window, Kepler 442c's oscillations will likely collapse into complete gravitational failure. At that point, conventional approaches become humanity's only option. Dr. Caldwell seized on this admission of risk as validation of his opposition to Elena's project. Director Webb, Dr. Vasquez is acknowledging that her approach could actually make our situation worse. If her gravitational manipulation fails, we lose both her solution and the time we could have used developing conventional alternatives. Elena turned to face Caldwell directly, her patience finally exhausted by his persistent attempts to undermine humanity's best hope for survival. Dr. Caldwell, your conventional alternatives have a 0% chance of success because they're based on fundamental misunderstanding of the forces we're facing. My approach has risks, but it also has the potential to solve the crisis permanently rather than just postponing inevitable disaster. She gestured toward the display showing the asteroid field's continued approach toward Earth. Dr. Caldwell, in 12 months, those asteroids will impact Earth, regardless of whether you approve of my methods. The only question is whether humanity will face that impact with a restored gravitational anchor protecting our solar system, or with nothing but hope and nuclear warheads. Director Webb made his decision with the certainty of someone who'd learned to trust competence over credentialed authority. Dr. Vasquez, you have full authorization to proceed with gravitational anchor restoration using the modified timeline and approach. Whatever resources you need, consider them approved. As Elena prepared to begin the most complex scientific undertaking in human history, she carried with her not just the hopes of 7 billion people, but the memory of a little girl who'd made her promise to keep watching the stars. The woman who'd been rejected 12 times was about to attempt something that would either save humanity or prove that sometimes even the most brilliant minds can reach too far beyond the possible. 11 months later, Elena stood in NASA's Deep Space Operations Center, watching humanity's future unfold in real time across dozens of holographic displays. The Gravitational Anchor Restoration Project had consumed every resource NASA could provide, transformed international space cooperation, and pushed human technology beyond anything previously imagined. Now, with the asteroid field just 7 months from Earth impact, everything depended on the next 6 hours. Dr. Benjamin Torres approached Elena's primary workstation, his face showing the exhaustion that had become common among everyone involved in the project. Dr. Vasquez, all orbital energy collection platforms are online and synchronized. Solar power accumulation is at 97% of projected levels. Elena barely looked up from her gravitational wave generator, now expanded into a complex array of interconnected devices that filled half the operations center. Her fingers moved constantly across holographic interfaces, making micro-adjustments to gravitational pulse patterns that would either stabilize Kepler 442c or destroy humanity's last hope for survival. Dr. Torres, confirm that deep space communication network arrays are properly aligned with Kepler 442c's current orbital position. We'll only have one synchronization window, and the timing has to be perfect down to the microsecond. Director Webb monitored the operation from his command station, surrounded by officials from every major space agency on Earth. The past 11 months had transformed him from NASA administrator to coordinator of humanity's most ambitious undertaking. The weight of absolute responsibility had aged him visibly, but his voice remained steady as he managed communications with world leaders who were watching humanity gamble its survival on the theories of a woman their institutions had dismissed for 15 years. Dr. Sarah Hoffman called from her mathematics station, her voice carrying the precise urgency of someone tracking variables that could determine whether civilization survived the next year. Dr. Vasquez, Kepler 442c's gravitational oscillations are accelerating beyond our predicted parameters. The planet's core instability is increasing faster than our models anticipated. Elena's expression remained calm despite the implications of Hoffman's report. 11 months of 18-hour workdays had taught her to function under pressure that would have paralyzed most people. Dr. Hoffman, the accelerating oscillations are actually beneficial. Kepler 442c is responding to the preliminary gravitational pulses we've been transmitting over the past week. The planet's core is essentially preparing for synchronization. General Catherine Ross spoke through the Operations Center's communication system from her Pentagon command post, her military background making her focus on contingency planning even as Elena's project approached its critical moment. Dr. Vasquez, if gravitational anchor restoration fails, our nuclear interception program is standing by. Dr. Caldwell's team has 47 warheads positioned along the asteroid field's projected trajectory. Elena didn't respond immediately to General Ross's comment, but everyone in the Operations Center understood the implications. Dr. Caldwell had spent the past 11 months developing conventional backup plans while systematically documenting every challenge and setback in Elena's project. His detailed reports to Pentagon officials emphasized the risks of untested technology and the wisdom of proven military solutions. Dr. Marcus Caldwell entered the Operations Center flanked by several senior NASA officials who'd supported his opposition to Elena's approach. Despite Webb's authorization of the gravitational anchor project, Caldwell had never stopped building political support for alternative solutions. His presence during the critical synchronization attempt felt like a vulture waiting for confirmation of failure. Dr. Vasquez, Caldwell announced with barely concealed anticipation. The President and Joint Chiefs are monitoring this operation directly. They need real-time assessment of success probability as conditions change. Elena finally looked up from her workstation, meeting Caldwell's gaze with the calm confidence of someone who'd spent 11 months preparing for this exact moment. Dr. Caldwell, gravitational anchor restoration isn't like launching a rocket where you can calculate precise success probabilities based on established parameters. We're attempting something humanity has never done before, using principles that our understanding of physics is still catching up to. She gestured toward the holographic displays showing Kepler 442c's oscillating gravitational field in real time. But the mathematics are sound, our equipment is functioning within acceptable parameters, and the planet is responding to our preliminary gravitational pulses exactly as predicted. If you need to give the President a number, tell him we have better than even odds of success. Agent Patricia Kane monitored the operation from her security station. Her role expanded to include coordination with international intelligence agencies who were tracking public reaction to news of the asteroid crisis. Dr. Vasquez, global monitoring stations are reporting gravitational wave detection consistent with your projections. The synchronized pulse sequence is propagating across interstellar space as designed. Elena nodded, her attention returning to the complex calculations that would determine whether her life's work would save humanity or prove catastrophically inadequate. Agent Kane, confirm that all monitoring stations are recording gravitational wave patterns for analysis. If this attempt fails, the data could be crucial for understanding what went wrong. Dr. Torres approached Elena's workstation with updated readings from NASA's deep space instruments. Dr. Vasquez, Kepler 442c is showing unprecedented gravitational coherence. The planet's core oscillations are stabilizing into patterns that match your theoretical models almost perfectly. Elena allowed herself a moment of cautious optimism as she watched gravitational waves propagate from Earth's satellite network toward the dying planet that held humanity's fate in its gravitational influence. Dr. Torres, we're seeing exactly what should happen if gravitational anchor restoration works. But we won't know for certain until we see how the asteroid field responds to Kepler 442c's restored gravitational signature. The Operations Center fell silent except for the hum of computers processing calculations that would have been impossible just years before. Everyone present understood they were witnessing either humanity's greatest triumph or its most elaborate failure. Elena's gravitational wave generators continued their synchronized pulse sequence, sending precisely timed gravitational disturbances across vast distances of space toward a planet that most of Earth's population didn't even know existed. General Ross's voice crackled through the communication system with an urgency that made everyone in the Operations Center look up from their individual tasks. All stations, we're detecting massive gravitational disruptions in the Kepler 442c sector. Energy readings are off the charts. Elena's workstation erupted with data as Kepler 442c responded to the synchronized gravitational pulses with an intensity that exceeded even her most optimistic projections. The planet's core stabilized completely, its gravitational field coherence jumping from barely detectable to stronger than it had been in decades. Dr. Vasquez, Dr. Hoffman, called from her mathematics station, her voice filled with wonder and disbelief. Kepler 442c's gravitational signature just increased by 300%. The planet isn't just stable, it's actively strengthening its gravitational anchor effect. Elena watched her holographic displays with the focused intensity of someone who'd spent 15 years preparing for this moment. The gravitational waves propagating from the restored planet were already beginning to influence the asteroid field's trajectory, pulling the space debris back into the stable orbital patterns that had protected Earth's solar system for millennia. Dr. Caldwell stood frozen at his observation station, watching displays that showed Elena's approach succeeding beyond anyone's expectations. The asteroid field was decelerating, its trajectory shifting away from Earth as Kepler 442c's restored gravitational influence reasserted control over the cosmic debris that had threatened humanity's survival. "This is impossible," Caldwell whispered, his institutional certainty crumbling as he watched Elena's dismissed theories save human civilization. "Gravitational effects can't propagate this quickly across interstellar distances." Elena's smile held no triumph, only the quiet satisfaction of someone whose work had finally found its proper application. "Dr. Caldwell, gravitational waves travel at the speed of light. The effects we're seeing now began the moment our synchronized pulses reached Kepler 442c, exactly as my calculations predicted." Director Webb stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of someone speaking for all humanity. "Dr. Vasquez, on behalf of NASA, the United States government, and every person on Earth, thank you. You've just saved our world." Elena's response was characteristically modest. Director Webb, "I didn't save anything. I just kept a promise I made to my daughter 8 years ago, to keep watching the stars and protecting Earth from dangers that others couldn't see." Agent Kane's security monitoring detected something unprecedented happening across the globe. "All stations, we're receiving reports from observatories worldwide. The asteroid field's trajectory change is visible to ground-based telescopes. The space debris is definitely moving away from Earth." Elena gathered her personal effects from the workstation, where she'd spent 11 months developing technology that would redefine humanity's relationship with cosmic forces. Her manila folder, worn but still intact, contained research that had transformed from rejected theories into the foundation for planetary defense capabilities. Dr. Torres approached Elena as she prepared to leave the operations center. "Dr. Vasquez, what happens now?" "The gravitational anchor restoration was successful, but you've essentially created technology that could influence any planetary body in our galaxy." Elena's expression grew thoughtful as she considered the implications of what she'd accomplished. "Dr. Torres, that's a question for administrators and politicians to answer. My work was about solving an immediate crisis, not about creating new capabilities for human civilization to manage." Dr. Caldwell found the courage to approach Elena directly, his face showing the humility of someone whose fundamental assumptions about the universe had been proven wrong. "Dr. Vasquez, I owe you an apology. I spent 15 years dismissing work that could have saved countless lives if I'd had the wisdom to recognize its value." Elena looked at Caldwell with the compassion of someone who'd learned that forgiveness serves the forgiver more than the forgiven. "Dr. Caldwell, institutional thinking evolves slowly, and revolutionary ideas often require crisis to gain acceptance. Your opposition forced me to develop more robust theories and better evidence. In some ways, your skepticism made my eventual success more complete." She paused, touching the telescope pendant that had become her connection to Emma's memory. "But Dr. Caldwell, the next time someone presents you with ideas that challenge established thinking, remember that being right isn't always about following conventional wisdom." Elena walked toward the operations center exit, her work complete but her legacy just beginning. Behind her, NASA's scientists were already analyzing the gravitational wave data that would launch a new era of cosmic engineering. Ahead of her lay a return to her mountain observatory, where she would continue watching the stars with the knowledge that humanity now possessed capabilities that previous generations had never imagined. Dr. Webb intercepted Elena before she reached the exit. "Dr. Vasquez, NASA would like to offer you any position you want: department head, research director, chief scientist. Name your terms. Elena's smile held the wisdom of someone who'd learned that institutional recognition wasn't the source of scientific satisfaction. Director Webb, I appreciate the offer, but I have everything I need in my mountain observatory. The stars don't care about titles or organizational charts. She looked back at the holographic displays, still showing Kepler 442c's restored gravitational field, protecting Earth from cosmic threats. Besides, there are other dangers out there that institutional science hasn't recognized yet. Someone needs to keep watching for them. As Elena walked through NASA's corridors for what might be the last time, she carried with her not just the satisfaction of saving humanity, but the knowledge that her daughter's memory had been honored through service to something greater than personal recognition. Emma had wanted to explore the stars and protect Earth. Through her mother's work, she had done both. 3 months after the gravitational anchor restoration, Dr. Caldwell requested reassignment to NASA's new Cosmic Defense Initiative, where he would spend the remainder of his career developing early warning systems for astronomical threats. Dr. Torres accepted Elena's invitation to collaborate on advanced gravitational wave research, splitting his time between NASA and Elena's mountain observatory. Director Webb established the Elena Vasquez Institute for Cosmic Engineering, ensuring that future scientists would have institutional support for revolutionary research. Elena returned to her cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains, where she continued her solitary work watching gravitational waves propagate across the galaxy. Sometimes, on clear nights when the stars seemed particularly bright, she would imagine Emma floating among distant planets, exploring worlds that no human had ever seen but that gravitational waves had revealed to patient observers on Earth. The woman who'd been rejected 12 times had saved the world not through institutional recognition or official validation, but through the simple act of keeping a promise to a little girl who dreamed of protecting Earth from cosmic dangers. In the end, love had proven more powerful than any force in the universe, even gravity itself. The asteroid field that had once threatened human civilization now followed stable orbital patterns around Kepler 442c, transformed from harbinger of destruction into guardian of the solar system. And in her mountain observatory, Elena Vasquez continued watching the stars, knowing that somewhere among them were other threats and other opportunities for the species that had learned to engineer gravity itself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.